Today is our 12th session of the Cultural Accelerator, the 5th and the final week. And you might probably know already from the presentation that we had and the work that we've done in promoting this event, that today the topic is about cultural trends. And we will be today in conversation with Azad Asifovich, who is the curator, art talker, and also a part of dino 6 art platforms team. He is presently based in Paris and joins us from France today. He has been working extensively on a number of projects, including the ones where he assists and helps the artist to create a new storyline and narratives. And he works also a lot with the non-Western, non-European context. And we had been collaborating with Azad since 2019. Working on a number of projects. Unfortunately, in 2020, most of our projects were that took place online, but he also held probably the only offline project of dino 6 platform in Marseille during the opening week of Manifesta, and he presented a selection, a curatorial selection of video art from Azerbaijan in the joint event with other partners and colleagues. I also would like to give a brief introduction while we still wait for people to join the group about our today's speaker, Wetsi Mpoma, who is presently based in Belgium and has been also working as an activist, as a journalist, curator, and a very passionate in visual art and performances. She also founded the association, which is in French is Nouveau Système Artistique. Translated, it means the new artistic systems. That initiative works on promotion, dissemination, as well as realization of the project of Afro-descendant artists in Belgium and in Europe in general. So she also hosts a weekly column on cultural program Africana on Radio Campus, and is also a part of experts appointed to participate in the consultation process with African diasporas set up by the Royal Museum for Central Africa. So it's a very interesting, I expect to have a very interesting discussion that would be tackling a number of topics of what is present day trends and in culture and in art and in contemporary art as well as in general. I'm giving the floor to Azad and Anne.
Thank you, Asli. Good morning, everybody. And thank you, Asli, for this such a great presentation. And thank you, Anne, to being here with us today. And I would like to start with our conversation with some details or small anecdotes. We met Anne several months ago. Sorry, I muted myself. When we started to work on some exhibition project research, and initially our meeting started with some consultation advice that she gave about the question of decolonial and the way how we should today think some historical past, some historical events. I know that Anne, she's an activist, she's a journalist, she founded some associative gallery who work with the artists of diaspora in Belgium. She's also in a state commission for decolonization and study of colonial past of Belgium. And also the question which will be very important today, it's a gender, it's a woman artist, and the museum role in all art system and system des arts. And I would like to give the word to Anne Wetsi, and the first question that I will ask you, Anne, how you arrived till there? What was your study, and when you realized for the first time that oh, there is something is wrong in this whole art system?
Hello, everyone. I would like to thank you, Azad, for inviting me to speak today, and I also thank Asif for the organization of this event. So yeah, it's a good question. I think that I have always been conscious aware of the racism, of the structural racism at work in Belgium. But when I was younger, because I grew up into it, I was normalizing it as everyone in the society. The day I really discovered that it was possible to say no to say no to racism and to actually start being vocal about the fact that this situation wasn't normal is when I started to read, African American writers and also African association in France who were already engaged into the decolonial process and brought it here. So I would say it was around 2010. And this is also when I started to be a cultural journalist, but really with this decolonial mindset. And yeah, as I said, at the beginning, we thought the situation was normal and was normal because it was like this, and we knew it was always, it was also like this in France, for example. And when we realized that, and we were also accepting it because we were telling ourselves, okay, maybe the African American, they made their own cultural revolution, but they are African Americans when we are Black Europeans. And at some point, I think this is when we can talk about internalized racism, because we thought that as Black Europeans, we didn't have the same rights or the same value than African Americans. Then it really took a whole process to finally be aware that, but look, we are all humans. We all have value, and we all have things to do and to say, whether in the artistic world, whether into the cultural, or even into the other sectors fields. This is what decolonization is about.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you for this for the information, and also for your work, because also as a non-white, non-European curator, I can share my experience. And it started it's the first time I realized that I'm considered as a non-white in France. Also, when I study interested to some decolonial studies, and who are pointing the problem in a culture. And it started for me with a question of equality in the museum collections in Europe, when suddenly I realized that the women artists are representing only less of 20% of museum collection, which is a very important moment, because if you realize that in an art school, 80% of the students are girls and women students, and at the end, only there is a 20% of women and 80% of men in a museum exhibition, major exhibition in Europe, in a museum such as Beaux-Arts, in a museum such as Centre Pompidou, in a Tate. It's mostly white men artists. And the idea of this conversation also was linked to these main cultural trends, and one of these cultural trends is gender equality. Gender equality now it's present everywhere. As you told, it started very medically supported in the United States, but I know also in Europe, like in your country, in Belgium now, and you as an activist and as a founder of this Wetsi Associative Gallery, you are very occupied by this question. And tell me, please, more about your activity as a in the fields of gender equality, please. Thank you.
It's a good question, because I like to say that when the cause of women in general is the cause of white women, and as a Black woman and a Black activist, I have also sometimes noticed that Black women were very often asked to take part into the white female activities, but the contrary wasn't always true. And now that we are also addressing the questions of decolonization, it becomes true, because we have dialogues and discussions that make it possible. And we start as Black female activists, we start to being listened and heard, and so dialogues are possible. But the truth for the moment is still that talking about decolonization, talking about the elevation of the Black community is still something very taboo, when it's totally normalized and accepted to speak about the elevation of the women in general, as long as you speak about the elevation of the women in general and not specifically of the Black women. Last year, in March, there was supposed to be an opening of the first exhibition with Black curator from Belgium and only Black female artists from Belgium too. It didn't happen because of the COVID. All the institutions had to close, and it was really like the first wave of COVID. And the exhibition, the project was postponed until January now, 2021. And it didn't happen because finally, you know, after all the movement of Black Lives Matter and everything that happened in Belgium, the museum, the cultural center, finally decided to cancel the project. And so now we are looking for another location to for this project. And this project was really asking, the title of the project was Through Her, like the first meaning like going through something, and in this case through the Black female body, and the through her also in the sense of the truth, like the artists were the idea was to ask the artists to really reveal a true aspect of their personality, of their artistic world. I invited Pascal Obolo, who is a French Black female curator from Paris, to this project, and she decided to do some research into the collection of the Museum of Ghent, here in Belgium, and she was questioning this. Her research was a question into the collection. It was really about diving into the collection of the museum to see, like in the collection in general, how many artworks from female artists do you have, or how many female artists are represented. And on the whole collection, I think we could say like 10%, like really 10% of female artists on the whole collection of the whole museum. But then she went a little bit further and she asked, okay, how many women from African descent do you have? And there, at this time when she did the research, it was totally possible to say, actually, no one, because there were artworks from our female artists from Brazil, but so we can say that in Brazil, you also have people from the diaspora or from the African diaspora at large, but it's not because you have a female artist from Brazil that she is with African descent. So that wasn't really, so we can really say that barely no one. You have the work of some African American and also African men, but men artists, but when it really comes to the female artists, then it was possible to say actually maybe no one. So that was really a very interesting start. And then we also found that there was actually the work of Clara Walker. They bought a book of her, a very nice art book. And actually, so finally, like diving into it, we could find the work of some African American artists or maybe Brazilian artists, but really no one from the African diaspora or even from the African continent. So this project was really engaged, and maybe also too much confrontational for the institution in the end.
Thank you, Anne, for your words. And also, I would like to point at an experience that I had 2 years ago before pandemic. I was invited by the University of Antwerp as a curator who realized once that, they have their collection mostly are composed by the white male artists. And the university, just for the people who are not familiar with the university collection, in Europe, some university like University of Antwerp, they have a collection. Collection is exposed, studied, and you can find sometimes exhibition inside of the university in a campus. And there is a huge artist like Wim Delvoye, like Jan Fabre, like huge white male artist supported by the market. It will be also one of our subjects with Wetsi. And they invited me to organize an exhibition about the war in the Middle East. And it was very funny because I was very happy and honored to be invited. I'm interested in a museum, in a university museum collections and how they're composed, the way of curating and the way of working with this kind of collections. And I was surprised that they invite me from Azerbaijan to work on this question of Middle East and the war in Middle East. It's very strange because I try to tell them, you can't do an exhibition about the wars in a white world and a Christian world. I mean, it will be a huge subject. You can put some, of course you can do something like a Wikipedia article, very large, who are pointing the subject. But after some time of reflection, I proposed to them to organize an exhibition and some cycle of exhibition about the question of dramaturgy, inspired by the works of Azerbaijani-born artist Babi Badalov, artist and poet, who just I would like to also to say that our cultural accelerator writing was done by him, and it's a typo that Babi was writing, and mostly Babi using the text as the artworks and the meanings and the words he's playing with, semiotics. And also the title of this exhibition at the University of Antwerp was a dramaturgie, was inspired by this idea that every time we are talking about the Middle East, we are talking about something sad, about something which is going wrong, about something who are not healthy, about something dramatic. And it started, of course, with the words, with some words of like with some works of Mona Hatoum, and it was a very powerful and strong video that this Palestinian artist are talking about the measures of distance and the letters that she sent to her mom, and mom wrote her back, and it's a very powerful work. But it was also some artists were invited to talk about this question of Middle East. What is it, Middle East? Why we are talking Middle East, and what's happened? And it was very interesting, the students' reaction as a main public of this exhibition, because also it was in a university campus, and they was horrified by some videos. They was every time switching off because they was talking that oh my God, there is too much emotion, there is too much like a negative energy in it, and some subject like the war in Palestine, and the work of Mona Hatoum is a very, as I told, is very strong. But in the same times, in left wing of the university, it was an exhibition about Holocaust, and this exhibition was okay for the students. There was some distance between that. Okay, it was in the 20th century, it's past, and okay, but exhibition about Middle East was like something shocking, something that we don't want to hear, listen. And at that moment, I start to ask myself, how many artists from Middle East the university has in their collection? And nobody. It was clearly nobody. There was clearly no artist in this huge collection, a very beautiful collection. I talked to them already. It was a question of, I thought, oh my God, you have a very tiny quantity of women artists in your collection. And we are talking about the University of Antwerp, which is a quite young university with new buildings, with some potential support that the university received. It's not. It's in some way it's a financially wealthy university. It's not struggling from subvention. And it's in Flanders region in Belgium. And I would like to ask you then about the question like cancel culture, how it's functioning now, because it's also one of the cultural trends now. Started in the States, like we know that some chairmen, some chair boards from the huge museums was demissioned, was cancelled because of some racist words, some racist position. Also, it happened in Paris, in Palais de Tokyo, when one of the director of Friend of Palais de Tokyo was publishing very shameful and very racist stuff about the artists or the of Asian diaspora, and it was a moment. It started 4 years ago, but 4 years ago it doesn't shock anybody. But with this moment when it's happened, cancel culture in the States, you have an impression that everything is also changed in Europe. And I would like to know why we need someone who starts in the States that we understood that we should to change here, please.
Yeah, there are so many different things to say, about it, because now in Belgium you also have a movement that is asking, okay, why are we talking about the death of George Floyd? To speak up about police brutality in Belgium. And why do we need to speak about George Floyd when we also have so many people who died in the hands of the police, and who died because of police brutality, who died because of structural racism. And I don't agree with the fact that we need someone from the US to die to be aware and to make it valid to speak about those questions. But this is how the world functions. And what can we do? Are we going to work with the world as it is, or the way it functions, even if we want to change it? Or are we going to start from an idealistic world. I think everyone in the society has its own function. So the people who want to address the question of, okay, George Floyd died in the US, but in Belgium, Lamin Bangura died in the same exactly, not exactly, but he also died suffocating by the police that were really like killed him on the floor in the same way. And we also have a recording, a voice recording, when you can really hear that at some point he cannot breathe anymore. So that's totally, like, I understand it and I share it, but at the same time, I also realize and I also accept the fact that when you had 15,000, 20,000 people in the streets in Brussels, it was because of George Floyd. It was because of the death of an African American. And what we can learn from it is about what I was talking about at the beginning. It's about the internalized racism. So it's good to be aware that it exists, that we are practicing it, to find solutions and to find ways to really start to praise ourselves and to give value to ourselves as Black persons, as racialized person in Europe. And about the cancel culture, I think this is what happened actually when the museum canceled the exhibition. I think it's an example. It's really about if we would have worked with white women or white female artists, and if it was a mix, I think it would have been more acceptable to them. But at the same time, what we wanted to show is that it was the first time that such a project would exist. And this is what we have been facing from the very beginning of our lives and our artistic practice. When we go to museums, we only see white people. When we go to see exhibitions, we only see white people. No Black people are represented. And when you enter a museum as a Black person, the only Black person that you take the chance to meet is the person who's cleaning the floor, or maybe the person who is guarding the artworks, but not the curator, not the person even at the front desk. The situation is slightly different into France, slightly, and also in the UK and in the US, but it's not because you have more opportunities in the US for Black people to work at high level, even in museums, that you don't have any racism into the US. So all those, the way that racism is working into the art sector or into the rest of the everyday life is really like moving. It's really, and it can really take different shapes. It's difficult to define, and that's also maybe one of the that's also maybe what makes it difficult to really address, because it's difficult to define, and it can really adapt to the situation and take different shapes and forms.
Okay, thank you. And the other question about these different shapes and forms, what's happened, what we should to do, what you think as a, in French we call it racisé, people racisé, and as this racisé people, what we should to do, because there is also, I see some questions from our Q&A, QR. How about police brutality in Nigeria, or it's only inclusive to USA, or fact that Japan has a chauvinist culture where only Japanese are allowed? Why we never talk about this matter? It was some spectator anonymous who were asking this question. And
about Japan, I didn't get it.
yeah, it's the question is, how about police brutality in Nigeria, or is it only inclusive to United States? Question. Also, or fact, Japan has a chauvinist culture where also only Japanese are allowed? Question. Why we never talk about these matters?
I guess I speak from my own perspective, and my own perspective is being a Black female art curator in Europe. But of course, you also have Japanese imperialism. But I think we shouldn't try to compare situations too much, because the fact is that at the moment, we are in the 21st century. The civilization which is dominating the whole world, the global world, is the European civilizations. Some people may say it's more the US civilization, but it's the European civilization. Europeans left Europe, went to what they called America, and they established, they created the United States, and actually a genocide happened for the natives American people who were living there before the arrival of European communities. So the culture that is at stake in the United States and that is spreading itself all over the world is the European culture. I think this is why we speak about the European culture and about the domination of the European culture, and maybe not about the domination of let's take this example, Japanese culture in its own country. And also, it might also be because this domination of the Japanese culture only occurs into Japan, or maybe in Japan and countries close, territories that Japan is dominating. It's less global, I would say. And then I don't want to speak about, something that it's not really my domain of experience. But there is really something with this European domination, because I think that European culture created the racialized people. As you said, as you mentioned, you became aware that you were not white when a white person made you feel that you were not white. And what is it, feeling that you're not white? It's feeling that you're not totally equal to the white person. That was the feeling, and that's why we address it, or we may give the impression to address it in a negative way. But what we want to do in the end is really to show the world that diversity is fine, that the African culture or the non-European culture are not subcultures, they are cultures in itself. And what we want to address with everything that I do, even working with artists in the work that I choose, in the theme that I choose to select, I always think about myself, about what would I have like to see as a little girl. What Wetsi, the little Black girl in Belgium, would have liked to see, what would have helped her to hear, to see, what experience would have been nice for her in a museum, in the art world. This is what I try, this is how I mostly try to select the work, the artist that I do, is really about you know, trying to use the art to heal myself, probably to heal the inner girl that is still present inside of me, and also to heal the world and to give that to the world, because the world is sick. And it's a matter of fact, it's not only personal, it's also visible into all these experience that you have mentioned, you know, with when you have directors of big institutions who clearly say out loud, who have racist words. It's not normal in a cultural institutions. I mean, they should be trained to appreciate every culture and to give value to every culture. But what happens in reality, what we see is that maybe museums are keen to give values to objects from the past of non-European cultures, like objects of African objects, classical African objects. They have a lot of value, you know, you can, some of them have worth millions. But when it comes to contemporary African artists, then it's different. Then they are relegated to, okay, but it's not really contemporary art, it's African art. And then all of a sudden they have less value. So what we try to do with our work is really to re-establish the truth. The truth is that contemporary art wouldn't exist without the participation of African artists, of racialized artists all over the world. You know, contemporary art is already a result of the global world and of a mix. So give values not only to those old objects, but also to the everyday people and everyday artists and contemporary artists who are still living, who are living now in this global world.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne. And well, you also touched the other questions that I would like to discuss with you. It's today one of the trends, cultural trends. It's activism or artivism and the museum, and the way that we are seeing the museum as a new ruins. It's into this conference of Bruno Latour, who was talking about the new areas of ruines, les nouvelles ruines. And me, I used to now to consider it as a museum, it's a new ruin, who should be reconstructed, deconstructed, then reconstructed. And from that point of view, you mentioned something very important, that till now, when in a conversation with a huge museum curators who my colleague and one of the organizers and member of Tardina group, Asli, had this experience when we are talking about some exhibition of some minority in a huge museums like in Centre Pompidou, and when we are talking about the woman artist, and when we mentioned that it's some artists are very important, and unfortunately we have no we should to try to respect some quota of artists, like in a countries like in Finland, in a countries like Sweden. I think now they have a quota in the museums that you should also expose not only white male artists but the woman artists. Well, as you told, it's also mostly linked to the white woman artists, but there is some few changes, and one of this changes for me linked to this bottom-up democracy, when it's not people in the top management of the museums who are talking about the change, but the people who are young specialists in the museum. And from this point of view, activism and the artivism in the museum, for me, will be one of the important trends also after end of pandemic, when the museum will be able to reflect about their collection. Because one of the things that I was, when I was preparing our conversation, I suddenly realized something. It's very simple, but I suddenly realized that when you are going some ethnographic museum, you find the people the works by African artists that were like from African continent. You find the contemporary artwork. You find the contemporary artwork people from the, I don't know, it was in Russia, for example. In Russia, people, the artists from the north of the Russia, like Inuit and the other minorities. When I was at school, we were going to the museum, for example, in the Contemporary Art Museum. You were seeing like all white European artist, all white Russian artist, and all the artists was like an ethnographic museum. It was a, yeah, and this idea of to reduce people to their ethnie in French, to their ethnography in English, and I think that it will be one of the very important moments to work in a new world after pandemic for the museums, to reflect how their collection in a multicultural and multi-linguistical countries like in Belgium, like in France, in the countries with the colonial past, how they should include now the artists from minorities, from the gender minorities in this dialogue.
It's really intricate. There are so many, like, on one hand, you have this question of how classical African art, for example, to speak about African art, how classical African art is being shown into ethnographic or colonial museums. It's still in old antique vitrine behind glasses, and everything is made to how can I say now, to confirm the idea that those objects have value because a white man decided that they have value, but they are presented as if in their own context of origins, they were not works of art. That is problematic. Now talking about contemporary art, museums, institutions make a difference in between contemporary art and African contemporary art. And when we speak about African contemporary art, they only think about artists coming, like living on the continent of Africa. And everything is made as if there were no space for Black artists from Europe. And what I want to say is that Black artists from Europe may decide or may feel that their identity is definitely linked to Africa, to the African continent. They may also not feel that their identity is linked to the African continent. It should be something, they should be free to decide whether or not they want to be considered as African or not. So talking about diversity and inclusiveness is always a tricky word, because at some point, I don't really feel as part of the diversity. Talking like, why would museums in Belgium target me as diversity when I was born here? I speak French, I speak Dutch, I speak English, like I speak European languages. And my culture is European too, you know? So talking and addressing messages to museum, this is also why I think it's difficult, because we have to be subtle, and to be understandable, it's difficult to include subtleness. But it's important to also show that museums should also think about hiring people from more diverse, with brackets, backgrounds, whether it's social, because then again, you can decide to hire or to work with African artists, but what is their social background? If they are close to the family of the president, then maybe you're still missing the point. You're still not addressing, you're still not talking to the base, as I think Bell Hooks speaks about it a lot into her writings, that there are different classes, social, economical classes into the Black communities as well, and it's also a question to address. So talking about museums, about inclusiveness, about bringing up other communities, I think it's important to also choose the right words. I would say, even if I'm totally aware that the choice of words is also a trend, because we are talking about trends, in the 90s, the trend was really about talking about diversity into museums, and then it became talking about inclusiveness, and now it's also about decolonization. And those words have to be used because we need to speak with languages, with words, but at the same time, it's important not to use the words and make them empty words. It's really important to stay concrete and to really think about the collectivity, think about groups and not about people. It's not okay to do a project and to be like, yeah, we are going to work with this Black curator, or with this Black female curator, or with this curator from Azerbaijan. It's good, of course, but then it doesn't change the game for all the others. We also need to find to think about programs, on the long term, to make museums and cultural practices and artistic practices more inclusive.
Okay, thank you for this question, for this answer. And my last question, and then we will go to the questions from the public. My last question was linked to the empowerment of some communities, some ethnic communities, some queer communities, and someone who say empowerment, like say some financial wealth, say some financial richness, who linked in Europe to some cultural wealthy situation in some institution. And my idea is what you think the connection between empowerment of minorities and the representation of culture of minorities as a part of, as a equal part of the cultural movements, artistic movement in countries like, okay, United States, but also in Europe, like in Belgium, in France. What do you think about this question of market? Because for last 2 years, there is some boom of artists from African continent, and it's supported by the market, but it's supported by the market and some stakeholders who has this decision power, like huge galleries who suddenly start to work with the artists from minorities, to some women artists from Arabian countries, to some like from we know that there is also like important artists like Mona Atum that I mentioned, like Shirin Neshat, but also you mentioned in our conversation in the beginning, Kara Walker, which became like a huge star, huge woman artist. And the fears that I have that as it was with a woman artist, to say that, okay, in the exhibitions there is some woman artist, we will put every time Louise Bourgeois. 10 years ago, every white male curator, when you ask him, okay, what is about the quality of the exhibition or museum collections that you are doing, he was like, oh, there is some works by Louis Bourgeois. And I phrase it now, it will be some answers like, oh, there is a works by Karavolka in the exhibition.
Yeah, this is exactly the point. It's not sufficient to target some big stars, some privilege, some big stars, or to take some persons, some artists or curators from those minorities to make them stars, and then to forget about the rest of the groups. It's not okay. That's why I say that it's really important to think about the group, to think about minorities as a group of person and not as individuals. Of course, they are individuals, but don't get me wrong. But then it's important to find ways to make art collections, art institutions more inclusive, like to work as a mirror of the society. And to me, it would be about talking about the art school. The art school is an institution in itself. There are so many things that an art school could do to be more inclusive, because there are most of the teachers of white persons, whether female or male. Of course, you have more male teachers than male. But then how can we start talking about real inclusivity into the art schools? Because the students who go there, as a Black student, if you don't see a Black teacher, if you don't see a Black artist successful into your country, why would you like to become? Why would you like to become this teacher that doesn't exist? Why would you like to become this artist that doesn't exist? Why would you like to become this curator that doesn't exist? You don't want that. You also you need role models, of course, but you also need to think that it's possible, because for the moment, and also my experience, because I was very naive when I was in my 20s, I thought, oh, there are no Black curators, but maybe I'll be one, and maybe it will be easy. Maybe it doesn't exist because nobody wanted to do it, or, but now, years later, my experience tells me that it's not because nobody wanted, or it's just because there is no space in in the spirit of the person. In psychology, the human being works with categories, and there is no categories for the Black female curator. So as long as this category doesn't exist into people's minds or into the imaginary, then it's not possible for this person to take this place, And if I look at myself, I had to become an activist to speak about the lack of presence, of existence of Black female curators in Belgium, to enable myself to become a Black female curator in Belgium. Because then people from institutions who would listen to me would call me and be like, hey, you know what, it's true, I never thought about it. Why don't we make a project together targeting, the question of decolonization in Belgium? So it's also interesting for me to do that, but at some point, what I want for future generations is really to be able, I want the children of the future, I want the children that, the people who are children now and who would be adults in 10 years from now, to become curators, and, to to work with Magritte collections or with Picasso in Paris, you know, and I don't want them to have to work to specific questions related to their backgrounds. Maybe you have a white female curator who's passionate about the African arts. It should be her right to work on this topic, and it should be the right of Arab, of Black kids to work on Magritte or Picasso. You know, so that's what I want in the future. But I know that at my level, you know, it works as it works, and we need to keep decolonizing institutions. It takes time. It's a long, very long process.
Thank you very much for this conversation, welcome. Also for the answer, and very inspiring. Well, now I would like to give the word to Asli, who will translate to us some questions from Azerbaijani language into English for us from our audience. Thank you again.
Well, thanks, Azad, for bringing me back. I think I would also like to give a little wrap-up and summary of what we've been discussing. Also, as we have so many questions and only 15 minutes left before we end our discussion today, I wanted just to comment on few and put several questions in one and address to you, and we'll be very grateful if you keep a very concise and brief answers to them, so that everyone is happy and all our audience gets a chance to hear your opinion. So we have a lot of questions tackling the issue of racism and the fact that in some places it's more obvious than others. We also speak about Eurocentric racism, whereas in other geographies and other countries there's also various types of racism. I guess as we don't have the representatives of these countries, this would be not correct neither to comment nor to give our opinions about this. I have answered that to our anonymous attendee, that as Dino 6 art platform, we have very limited contact with Asian-based artists, especially in China or in Japan. Although myself, I visited Japan in 2019 to attend an international museum conference, ICOM, in Kyoto. And I had like a very amazing experience of hospitality, and I didn't experience any racism. Actually, people were very helpful and supportive. I was traveling half of the country by myself without speaking a word of Japanese, and people were very supportive. And when it comes to our experience of working with non-white artists, myself and Azad, we did have a very wide experience of doing projects in Europe and also in Azerbaijan. As a curator, I've been working with a number of artists from the region of Middle East and Africa. And one of the questions was actually, how do you define African art? Because the continent itself is very diverse, and we do have the northern part, which is more Arabic, and also the colonial history gives a very diverse landscape and languages spoken and cultures mixed. So that's the question to you, Anne. What is the African art, and do you put artists from the Northern Africa in that definition, or for you it's a separate category?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and you know, it's a question that that actually starts at every project, in every project that we do. When I speak about the project, like my personal projects about Wetsi Art Gallery, the beginning, like the root of it is about colonization. And it's really about racism against Black people in Europe. that doesn't mean that there are no other kind or other types of racism. It's really that the racism that we are tackling into our work is really the racism related to the colonization of Belgium, and Belgium colonized Congo first, and then Rwanda and Burundi. So most of the projects that I do are really with Black artists, whether they are from the Congo or not. And I also work with the Black diaspora at large, which means that I also work with African American artists and with artists from the Brazil. So far, I haven't had any real opportunity to work with people from North Africa. But I know in Belgium a journalist and I know different artists and different people from North Africa who define themselves as African and who actually define the Arab culture as the culture of the invaders. As we define the European culture as the culture of invaders. So definitely, this is a good question. I don't have a straight answer to it, but it's true that if I am being honest, in my experience of working with the Black and African culture, it also means Black culture.
Thank you. And we also have a question that comes from Kazakhstan, from our member of the audience. Mm-hmm. And the question is actually to both to Anna and Azad. And you could also read the full version of it in Q&A. I will try to concise. So it is about it's sometimes hard to communicate social justice movement, feminism, post-colonialism, anti-racist, and post-Soviet space specifically. And I agree with our friend from Kazakhstan that this is quite difficult, not only in Kazakhstan or Central Asia, but also in the Caucasus. And even though we can find so many historical parallels with the colonialism in these territories, actually a number of these topics are still taboo. Like there is not much going on in post-colonial research of in the Caucasus or in Central Asia, or if there is any, it is starting very recently. And what the question is about is how do you think culture can help raise solidarity in societies where these issues are misunderstood, like in the post-Soviet space? What should cultural workers do? And the final question, the final part of the question, can you share any experience of overcoming this misunderstanding? And thanks a lot for the question. It's really good one.
Yeah. Azad, I'll let you start.
Oh, I would like that you start. Well, I think that thank you very much also for the question, and I think that it's very interesting, and why it's very complicated to talk about these issues. I think that also there is an idea of taboo. There is some patriarchal way, some colonial patriarchal way of thinking that how it should be. And as a part of the general education, it started that you shouldn't ask the question who can questioning the system and the way of system functioning, because otherwise you are persuaded as someone who would like to destroy the system and the way that all the people are living happily, and you see yourself as a destructor, like someone who are annoying or doing some noises, and with the idea that everything is okay. I had this experience when I first started to work with a woman artist, woman activist from Eastern Europe, like from feminine movement, which was very criticized in their country, and even me in Europe, I was quite in the position of I don't know how to react, I don't know how to think, and it was a lot of work to also to understand, to get into the context and to understand what they want and what as a movement, what they would like to bring, which kind of question, and also to answer to this question. And so I think that we can only talk about our place and our experience. You never can talk about the experience of how Asian people feel racism when you are not, I mean, Asian. It's some error and mistake in post-colonial and decolonial studies. They are talking about it. The specialists like, perhaps Annie, you can help me. I have like
Ashimbembe?
Yeah, Mbembe.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. As the Mbembe who are talking about this idea that you can talk only about your place, about what you felt, and this experience. Of course, it could be global, but when we are talking about, for example, Soviet presence in Azerbaijan, who are not really questioning, so there is no really some huge research in artistic fields who are questioning this impact. Also, in this context, we have no really artworks who are questioning the impact of the Second World War in Azerbaijani context, because all this artwork, all the meaningful works like a text was written on Russian and was linked to some very specific context. And I think that the only way it should be how we can move the situation, and I think that the first, it's starting from the school and talking from the school, like from the high school, they bring on a table the question like this. The second place, and the second area which should be asked and work is the university. I think that the studies program in the main university, but especially in a colonized countries university, should take some break and rethink how they can bring this question on a table. And third, also the artist, I mean, some how to say, some bourses de recherche, some funding for the research should be given by the colonizer country, like in the case of Azerbaijan, it should be Russia, for the Azerbaijani artists who would like to work with this subject. It's my opinion, but it's
about like what can cultural workers do. I'm not sure the question is really put at the right place, because of course cultural workers, they want to help, they want to change the world. This is why they do what they do. But most of the time, they are not the person in charge of the general programs, and maybe they don't really have this power. But I think that working on inclusiveness, working in an inclusive way is really about working with the communities concerned, is really about listening to the people, listening to the activists, listening to the artists and to the curators, and really try to bring people together from scratch, from the beginning of the projects, and to build things together. It's really about inclusiveness, I think, the word. Even yesterday evening, I had another meeting with people of the diaspora in Belgium. And we were talking about the collaboration with the African Museum during the renovation process, and people are still so marked, so marked by the lack of respect they have been treated during this process of renovation. You know, because the African Museum wanted to work with people from African descent or with African people, but just because, okay, it's not normal to work only with white people on African culture, so let's bring some Africans, but with no real need, no real will to change the game. It was really about, okay, now we can mark that bar, we can say there were Africans around sitting at the table, but there were no real will to listen to them and to change and to make the efforts, like the necessary efforts to work with them and to listen to them. Every time African people would say, oh, but maybe, for example, maybe we should work with Achille Mbembe. And it was like, it's impossible to work with Achille Mbembe because we have our scientists. So at the same time, they wanted to work with African people, but they didn't want any competition. They still wanted to be on the top. We have the knowledge. We are the African Museum of Tervuren. We are. And so it's really about accepting to put its own ego on the side, and it's not easy. And before saying I want to work with you, make sure that you really have the means to do it, because then you call people, you sit them at the table, you call the press and you say we are going to do this inclusive project, but in the end you don't have the real means to change the game, and it's not fair.
Thanks a lot for your candid answer. I understand that this topic could be a topic of a conference, entire conference, to tackle these things. And the idea of representativeness and bringing in people with different backgrounds and giving them the equal voice, like equal seat at the table, is unfortunately very rarely we have successful examples of that, be it from a perspective of an ethnographical museum, or be it from the perspective of developing a museum that is more inclusive and brings in communities. A few years ago, I was attending a training at Victoria and Albert Museum. And as you might know, this is a museum in the most expensive area of London, in South Kent. And one of their missions was to make sure that people from other areas, other boroughs of London, visit it. And for them, it was a very challenging issue, because people don't even feel intimidated of simply passing passing through the door of a museum. And we experienced that in a number of museums in Azerbaijan or greater region. I shared the same stories with my colleagues from Central Asia. People feel a lot of intimidation of going into cultural institution, because they feel that they're not educated enough, they're not dressed enough, or they might do something and they would get shushed, or would be would receive some negative feedback, and because of the fear, they prefer to stay home, and they prefer not to expose themselves to the beauty and art, which is, I guess, one of the major challenges of any museum or cultural institution. How you make your space welcoming, because it starts from, not even from your physical visit, it starts before with your digital communication. How you make sure that people feel welcomed and they find something linked to their interest in the museum. And majority of the museums, unfortunately, are very still perceived as a very not flexible, very stable, very hierarchical organizations and institutions. And this is something that we as a cultural workers could try to change. And obviously what Anne said, it will be very difficult, because we only could express our ideas, express our desires, but we're not the decision makers. Decision makers are organizations and institutions that are in charge of culture. In case of Azerbaijan, this is the Ministry of Culture. In case of other countries, I don't know, but maybe something relevant to the Ministry of Culture. I would like, I see that we are very, we are already past the allowed 15 minutes. And I just want to make one final remark, and I would really like you to be as like brief as possible. The questions are, many questions are about the double standards and what should be done in order to speak openly about injustices and how to how to adapt your own practice as an artist or as a curator to the things that you feel are unjust, and what would be your advices to people who want to change the world around them?
I would say work with the people, you know, work with the people, go in the streets, go in the streets and ask questions to the people, listen to them, and then if the project comes from the ground, you know, from the people, and you go up, then it's really easier to be inclusive and to speak to the people and to touch their heart. I don't know if you wanted me to be that concise, but yeah, okay.
And me, I think that people should, how to say, should have a courage to do the exhibition, questioning this subject in a museum. Why white male like us, Haki, can do the exhibition or criticize the institution like in a huge American museum, and why not racised artist can do it? I think that we should, in French it's oser, we should have a courage to do that.
Thank you very much. I think I will take that as a final remarks and as a way to also thank you, Azad and Anne, for your time and very interesting, challenging discussion.
Well, thank you very much for this invitation. And just one last word, I didn't have the opportunity to say that I think that my project with Gallery is very inclusive because it's not in a classical museum space. It's a former industrial space, and when people come, they are surprised because they have the feeling they can touch everything and that no one is going to, you know, beat their hands. So I think yeah, stay low and talk with the people, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for you, Anne, for being today with us. Thank you, Asli, for the invitation. To Dardina, thank you. To Tech Association, Cultural Accelerator, thank you. And it was such a pleasure to talk about this tackling question and this subject. And also, when you will be in Belgium, don't hesitate, go and visit Wetsi Gallery.
Yes, thank you.